being a priestess of Persephone to me more than being an end of life doula, because there's a sense of being able to sense what a community needs, and then creating the space for meeting that need. And that's different for everybody. It's different for the family, it's different for the community, and it's different for the person who is departing.
Welcome to Conversation for the Soul. I'm Linda Christine. Today I talk with Melissa Baker. Melissa is an end-of-life doula. This is a subject that I have been wanting to discuss for quite some time now. Death is feared by so many, but to me, there's a beautiful sacredness that comes from this passage from our human vessel into the ethers, returning to source from which we came. And the process of being a guide to lead people on that journey is just fascinating to me. So Melissa and I discussed that today. We also talk a little bit about Crone wisdom. We talk about her Unitarian upbringing, which kind of opened her up to being a little less dogmatic in her religion and a little bit more open-minded, which kind of unfolded into this beautiful sacred offering that she has for end of life. I think you're really going to enjoy Melissa. She's a very kind, patient, and gentle soul. And I am so excited to have her on here today. Before we get into that conversation, though, I'm going to ask you to please like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube page, to my podcast channels. This is how beautiful souls like Melissa get their stories out there. And these stories are magnificent teachers. So please like, share, and subscribe. And here we go with our conversation with Melissa Baker. Welcome, Melissa. It's so wonderful to have you here today on Conversation for the Soul. And I am so grateful. Shout out to my friend since 5th grade, Kelly, for introducing us.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Kelly. And it's such a joy to meet you today, Linda. Thank you for inviting me here.
I am so... Thank you. Thank you. I'm so excited to learn about your journey. Melissa is an end-of-life doula, and I am fascinated by that. I have been drawn to that. That keeps popping into my awareness. So I'm excited to have you on today. I actually reached out to probably a half dozen or more doulas to try and do a series on it, and I imagine they're busy, so one got back to me and couldn't do it, but so I'm excited when I came across your path. Tell me, how did that whole thing transpire for you? How did you get into this line of assisting the collective?
Yeah, I had never really imagined this to be a path for me. On my spiritual journey, I've learned to listen to synchronicity and to follow that guidance that seems to fall before me. If you're running across something over and over again, or if you're curious about what to do next, and there are signs showing up for you, you should probably follow them. And so for me, I had left the corporate world and really hadn't figured out what I was going to do next. I knew that I had been an executive assistant for 25 years, and I didn't find joy on that path anymore. And so I was reading, what life purpose books and that sort of thing, and asking friends what they recommended. What do you think I should be doing if it were different from what I've been doing? And some people said life coach, and I just thought, well, that's ridiculous because I don't know what to do with my life. How can I coach others?
Yeah, right.
And so, but I had this conversation with a friend of mine where, for the first time in us getting to know each other, he shared with me that he had a terminal diagnosis. And I intuitively had questions for him that turned out to be really thought-provoking for him. Like weeks later, I received text message saying, "No one's ever asked me before, what is my joy?" And I really had to think about it. My thought was, if you have a deadline, we all have one, but most of us don't know that it's closer than we'd like. And you have this information, so what are you doing with your time that is filling you with joy? And he wasn't doing those things, and he contemplated it, and he really was mindful about it, and then shared with me that his husband was his joy. And so in that moment, I said to a friend of mine, people said I could be a life coach, but I wonder if I could be a death coach, And the next day, that creepy Facebook algorithm came up.
Yeah, the one that watches us and listens to everything.
That's right. And it revealed a woman who was teaching coursework on how to be an End of Life Doula. And Deanna Cochran, I reached out to her, and it was before she'd started she now has a school for care at the end of life. And when I started with her, she had a home study program. So it was more affordable for me, who had left the corporate world at that time, to do this home study program. And that was how I started, just by going through the coursework with her, and with her written guidance, and then reading the books that she recommended and that sort of thing. And then it turned out that my dad's health was declining. And so I got to walk through that study and really making friends with death while mindfully walking with my father through the end of his life. And I feel that it was a gift to me to transform the way that I thought about death. I no longer, if I ever did, I didn't have a sense of fear about it. I certainly feared for his suffering, and I had more than the physical labor of caring for him. At the last 7 months of his life, he was a paraplegic after he broke his hip. And didn't walk again. So I learned how to be a nurse and to change an adult diaper and to use a Hoyer lift to get him out of bed. All of those things I was able to learn how to do, and those were easy compared to the emotional labor of his suffering. But I didn't fear his death and dying, and I was grateful to be able to assist him through his end of life in a really mindful, loving, compassionate way that was not also fraught with that fear-based thought that many of us carry when we think about not being here in physical form any longer. So,
what happened prior to all of this? Because you seem like a very awakened person. So what was the impetus for your awakening? Or reawakening, like many of us have had multiples.
It's true, I think. I think sometimes we're on a journey and we stray from the path and get stuck in the mundane, and we have to come back again. So my journey started at 23. I was raised Unitarian, so I was not enmeshed in any kind of dogma. I had the freedom to explore my spirituality, and in that year, my 23rd year, my mom said, I know that you've been curious about paganism, because I had read long ago Stevie Nicks was Wiccan. And so she said, there's going to be a feminine spirituality workshop at the Unitarian Church hosted by Margot Adler. And she had written a book called Drawing Down the Moon. She was also the granddaughter of Alfred Adler, and she was a correspondent for NPR in New York. She was really dynamic and so well grounded. And so in that weekend workshop, there were 120 women. And the thing that really captured me for acknowledging that there was something here for me was that she invited us all to circle up, and anybody who was feeling a sense of overwhelm or grief or trauma or sorrow to enter the center of the circle. And there were so many women in suffering. There weren't enough of us on the outer part of the circle to reach hands. And that was really eye-opening to understand that level of suffering in our community. And then she led us in this healing chant, and we chanted it over and over again. And I saw the women in the center of the circle were crying, and then I realized I also was shedding tears, and I felt this energy rising through my feet, and I'd never experienced anything like that before. And I thought, there might be something to this. And so, so that was the beginning. And then I from there, just kept growing with it. And I experienced a women's group or a goddess group with a friend of mine in Melbourne. And I thought, I want one of these too that I don't have to drive an hour for. And so I made my own. And I invited people from a couple of different areas of my life, some from the Unitarian Church, some from this study group that I was learning about Wicca with. And then we spent the next 20 years learning and growing together and meeting weekly. And we came to the table with whatever our strengths were, and we shared them. And we learned how to meditate together. We learned how to create meaningful rituals that were transformational together. We, had babies and birth blessings, and we had letting go rituals of when someone was dealing with grief of the loss of a husband and trying to start a new relationship, fearing that she would lose that person too if she married him. So much in my path has been about that connectedness through community, and so that's where everything really springs up in a full blossoming is in connection with others.
Wow. So are you still a part of this community, or has that expanded?
Yeah, it's a lot different now because the people that I started with, many of them moved away, but we are still deeply connected. It's something truly remarkable when you build sacred space with people and you put your energy into it. I think we were really only active as a full group, my original group, for probably 5 years. And then, people started moving away or life got in the way. But there is such a deep connectedness with all of us that if anybody is in need or struggling or if there's something to celebrate in life, we'll just meet virtually now, or we'll arrange, to gather somewhere. We haven't been able to do that in quite a while, but when we do, it is the most moving thing to me. It feels like all of the pieces of my heart have come home. And so since then, I have built new communities. I'm an Aquarius and an extrovert, and so I can't help but collecting people. Whoever resonates with me, I want to hold them close. And so, during the time I was caring for my dad, I was feeling really like I was supporting him, and I needed to be filled up too spiritually. And so I was writing meditations and that sort of thing. And a friend encouraged me to do something with that. And so we started a series of workshops that I led in 2019. We did one for each of the Celtic sabbats, the wheel of the year that acknowledges the changing seasons, and tying it to the way that we are cyclical. You know, the earth is cyclical, nature is cyclical, but also we humans are cyclical. Our spiritual beings are cyclical, because we are always like autumn leaves, you know, falling away and letting go of what doesn't serve us, and then, you know, springing to life with new growth and new opportunities. So we spent the year in those workshops doing some kind of a mindful meditation, and some kind of a ritual, some kind of craft experience, and for creativity. And then the next year we were going to do it again, but came the pandemic. So we started. So we started meeting on Zoom, and we, instead of meeting once every 8 weeks, we started meeting every week. There's something to that regularity in connectedness that really builds community in a deeper way. And we were so isolated because for the youngest of us is in her 50s, and the eldest is in her mid to late 80s. And so we were really staying safe, and I was caring for my parents, and I needed them to stay safe. I didn't want to bring the virus home to them. And so we continued meeting even once we'd all been vaccinated, and, you know, the scary parts were past. We decided we needed this, and so we still meet every Saturday on Zoom. And
well,
then
there's something about that Crone wisdom being shared and cultivated too.
It is, and I'm certain not a coincidence that you bring that up, because for some reason we continued to meet virtually and not in person, even though we were all vaccinated and being very cautious. And so our first gathering in person was last December. We did a croning, and it was a communal crowning the crone. And we crafted our own crowns, and then we went around the circle. We stated a declaration of what we were leaving behind, as this is how I related to when I was a maiden. These are the things I want to leave behind from that, you know, that insecurity and that, you know, the need to please everybody and that sort of thing. And the things that I'm holding on to are a sense of adventure and delight. And, you know, from the mother phase of life, I let go of putting everybody else's needs before my own, and I hold on to the nurturing and the comfort that I bring others. And then as the crone, you know, I claim my crown, I claim my sovereignty. I have crafted and curated this life, and I own it. It doesn't belong to anybody else but me. And it was glorious to be in person, to hold hands again, to be creative, and it was incredibly powerful for each individual in the group. So that's how we started. Now we're starting to meet in person again, but
I feel like there's a rising of the crone. I identify with the crone, and it's actually part of my business's name. And I feel like it's really been shut down over the centuries because, as witches were shut down one day too, I mean, any woman of wisdom or enlightenment or smarts, over the centuries has kind of been tamped down by the patriarchy. What do you feel about that?
I agree. A lot of people have been talking about the rise of the divine feminine. There's no question. Everything that's happening right now is, in the negative way, in the negative sense, is about fear, and there has long been a sense of removing what is perceived as power from women and from any sense of the divine in female form, thousands of years. And so, we've talked about, in 1992, when I was first introduced to this path, and started learning little bits about astrology, the person who was teaching that course to us said that we're coming into the age of Aquarius, but it is, it's kind of like Mercury retrograde. It's a 3-week period that happens 3 times a year, but there's a shadow period before and after, and so that energy is kind of there, for 14 days over here and 14 days over here on either side of it. And if an era is 2,000 years approximately, and we're coming out of the age of Pisces and into the age of Aquarius, then there's this shadow period. So we've been inching our way there, and making progress, and it terrifies the Piscean energy that has been in power for the last couple of thousand years. So the sad thing is that they would let go of the fear and allowed this loving, nurturing energy to rise. They'd realize that everything is okay. And it's not just okay, it's better. We have such a long way to go, but I agree with you. I can feel it rising, and I think Crone energy is definitely a part of that. As if you just think about it on a mundane level, those of us who are in our Croning years were fighting for the freedom of women in our maiden years, and it's the fact that we're seeing a loss of the freedoms we fought so hard for right now. It feels like that opportunity to allow our youth to rise and shine and feel empowered, and to honor everything that they're doing now and the becoming, their own becoming, because they're going to have to take it back for themselves.
Yeah, it's an interesting time for sure. I'd like to talk a little bit more about your doula work.
Mm-hmm.
To me, there seems to be such a beautiful. I just listened to a podcast today about a birthing doula,
Mm-hmm.
and thinking forward to our conversation today, and I'm like, wow, there's so many similarities in that. One, you're welcoming the soul in its human form, onto the planet, and in the work that you do, you're creating a sacred space for them to go back from which they came.
That's right. I love the beauty of that. And, the idea that a doula is someone who holds space for transition and transformation, in any direction. I was helping my soul daughter move from Winter Park to St. Pete a few years ago, and she acknowledged, she said, "You're being my doula right now, that that I showed up to help her pack, and I showed up for to welcome her into her new space." And And just that idea of bearing witness when someone is going through something that where they're never going to be the same. You know, a new mother is never going to be the same from that time that she goes from having a child in her womb to having a child in her arms. And it's the same at the end of life. It's, to me, it feels like a great privilege and honor to be invited to bear witness and hold space for someone when they're going through one of the biggest transformations of their life. It's the one guarantee we have when we're born, is that we will also die. And I understand that there are a lot of people who fear it and don't want to do it, or they refuse to talk about it. They refuse to prepare for it. They don't have really important, meaningful conversations with their family members because they just don't want to talk about it. They don't want to consider that they won't be here at some point. But there's so much compassion in doing that work to talk about the hard things with your loved ones, and to be prepared in ways, paperwork. You don't want to think about paperwork at the end of life, but boy, that 5 wishes that my dad did in 2016, he died in 2021, but I carried that piece of paper through the hospital with me, and I said, to the doctors, this is what my dad wants. He wrote it down for me. He said that he didn't want to be kept alive by machines at the end of life. He said that he, wanted to have, death with dignity. And I intend to give that to him. I need you now to be honest with me and tell me, if he comes off this ventilator, is he going to ever thrive again? And of course I knew the answer. He had already broken his hip and wasn't going to ever walk again. And he was just going to have, one case of infection or whatever after another. And so he gave me that gift of being able to make that really difficult choice of letting him go. I love it's funny because I've really grown to love the idea of embracing death. Deanna Cochran suggests that you decide as an end of life doula who are you going to serve? Are you going to serve the family? Are you going to serve the dying? Are you serving death itself? And after my dad died in 2021, the beginning of this year in January, I had the opportunity to serve my friend Sharon, and it was so much more satisfying than I ever dreamed it could be, because at the end of her life, and when everything was all finished, from the communicating with her friends and family about what was happening while she was in the hospital, and the daily good news or bad news, and comforting her friends and family when they wanted to talk about it, and being present for her, and being the one who gave her the bad news when it came. All of that process felt easy for me, and whereas others were telling me I could never do this, I don't know how you're doing this, it felt so easy for me because it felt like a blessing to me, and that she trusted me with all of this important work that needed to be done at the end of her life. And so when it was all done, and after I had helped craft the ceremony and celebration of her life, and that was like, there we were. It was like all the work had been done, and we'd sent her off into the light of truth. I was left with the sense that I had served her well. Mm-hmm. And that was the most important thing to me. I miss her still daily, but the grief wasn't as deep because I could just smile and know that she and I shared this remarkable experience and journey together, and then I showed up for her, and I never let her down. And it's a glorious, comforting feeling.
How does one come to decide that they want a doula? Because like you said, there's so many, and you see so much fear around death.
Yeah.
I have come to realize over the past decade that leaving the body and going to the ethers is a homecoming. It's something to really look forward to, being that eternal being again, that all-knowing part of Source and all of that. But that's not something that's an easy jump, to make. It takes a long time to ease into that, especially after all the indoctrination we've had around death. So I'm wondering how somebody makes that, mental leap to do that.
Well, I think that Sharon's a perfect example of that, because she was also Unitarian, but more agnostic, and really unsure. When our friend Lynn died a few years before, Lynn was another part of my finding this path. She had such grace at the end of her life, and Sharon had loved her dearly and felt really angry about it, was bitter about Lynn being gone, and about how fearful she felt. She expressed feeling frightened about it, not just that she was being reminded of her own mortality, but that not knowing what her friend had gone through, and just was holding on to so many negative feelings about it. So when I started learning about death and dying, and I was caring for my father in his decline, Sharon and her wife also were dealing with their own physical ailments, and so I had the freedom to show up for them as well. And so this whole several years of us together, I was sharing with them what I was learning, and right up until January, when she went into the hospital, she still was pretty ambivalent about it all. She just was still not ready to embrace that idea that what comes next isn't worse than where you are. So I don't know that she decided to have a doula, but she was stuck with me because I was not going to abandon her. And but I think that at the end of the journey, she would have been really, glad to have known that she had a doula that was going to walk with her all the way. And she, on that last day, when we just had learned that there was no hope left, I shared that news with her, and I said, I know you're really scared, and I know you're really mad because this sucks, and it's okay to cuss about it because this is not what any of us wanted. But could you consider suspending disbelief with me for a moment and imagine that what she feared was that it was going to be like a light switch going out and she was just going to cease to exist. And I said, can you consider that that's not going to happen? That when your body is finished, this earthly body is finished, that there's actually going to be a light switch that goes on, and you are going to be so expansive in your energetic form that all of this that you've been holding on to is going to seem really silly. That you're going to have the freedom to be everywhere all at once, because you will no longer be limited by this physical earthly body. And she said, I'll try. this guy on YouTube that I discovered probably during the pandemic, maybe a little bit before. I started following for when I was looking at looking for hope in the political world, and he's intuitive. His name is Cash Peters, and he is he has the ability to go into energy, and he sees picture. He calls them pictures because he's shown images, and they're metaphoric, like many intuitive people receive understanding through metaphor for them. And he learned, because people kept asking him, can you go into the energy of so and so when they died? Can you do a reading on the passing of someone? And he would say, I can't do that because they're dead. I go into energy. It's so, they need to be alive for me to be able to read them and go into their energy. And then one day it happened for him by accident. And he'd had his own near-death experience, and I think that might be what the trauma that woke that up for him. But so he started doing these pictures for the crossing over process, transition pictures, he calls them, and it was so satisfying to me to over and over again watch him doing these different figures, whether they were musicians or political figures, or if they were people who were deeply spiritual, like Thich Nhat Hanh, or the Buddha or Jesus. He did these interesting transition pictures, and what was consistent was that when we leave the body and come to the other side, that there's a process of letting go that is still required, to let go of shame and guilt and ego and attachment and belief, and to that once you've let go of all of this stuff that is really an earthly experience, that then you can return to the light of, the collective consciousness, the light of all that is, the light of truth. And there was, when he did the pictures for Thich Nhat Hanh, and I compared that, he was a Buddhist monk and spiritual leader and wise man, teacher. When he did the pictures for him, and I compared it to doing the POA practice, which is from the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, there's a transformation, it's a ritual, or it's really a mindful practice of saying, may I be forgiven for all of the harm that I've said and done. May I be accepted into the light of truth that, before me. And so I was really delighted to see that when he did the pictures for Thich Nhat Hanh, whom I was certain had been doing the POA practice for quite some time, his picture evidence matched up. So when I told my dad, and I told Sharon, this is what might happen. You might experience that you get into this place when you leave your body and you find yourself in a, proverbial tunnel of sorts, that I just want you to shed all of this stuff that you've been holding on to, the fear and the anguish and the despair and the frustration and the shame and the guilt. Let all of that go, and just head up that tunnel until you see the light, and dive right in, because you're worthy. We have so much built up in this human existence that has told us that we're not enough, we're not good enough, we're not pretty enough, we're not thin enough, we're not doing enough. And what I've learned from what Cash Peters can access to share with us is you're gonna have to let that stuff go. And so I guess that my goal really within my croning years is I want to let that go before I get there. I'm just going to go right into the light. I don't want to be holding on to any of this stuff. So it seems like worthy work to me.
Wow. Your story really brought something forward for me. I had a very dear friend who crossed over like 2.5 years ago. He suffered from addiction, alcohol addiction, and died way too young. And during my connection time early in the morning, I was awoke earlier than normal, and I knew there was a presence that needed to connect with me. So I went out to meditate, and he came forward with guilt and shame for what he carried in this life here. And I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Go to the light. That doesn't matter. Everyone views you. He was a very kind and generous and funny soul. Just a joy. And it was actually painful to watch him suffer from that addiction because he was just so full of that lightheartedness here. And I said, you don't realize how much you were looked at as a kind and generous and lighthearted and beautiful soul. So go enjoy, go to the light, don't be here. And it really surprised me that I had that experience. But after you said that story, I'm like, oh my gosh, it makes so much sense now. Makes so much sense. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, what a beautiful connection. He was so lucky that you were there to greet him and show him the way.
And it's so weird that it was like 2.5 years later. It's like, I know there's our time and the afterlife time, way different.
Yeah, that's right.
So I try not to think about it, but my human brain's like, no, wait a minute. Why did that take so long? I hope he wasn't wasting all this time, but...
Or you mentioned that you've been curious about the End of Life Doula, and signs keep coming up for you about it. And
there's another one. Thank you.
Maybe he was showing up, maybe not because he was lost, but maybe because you needed to be found.
Oh, Melissa, thank you for that. Yeah, good point. Very good point. Very good point. So walk us through, I know there's no typical day in the life of an End of Life Doula.
Mm-hmm.
But what kinds of things do you assist with in this whole process? And who did you pick as who you're serving? Is it the person crossing? Is it death? Or is it the family?
Ah, that's a very good question. I'm so all-inclusive.
You're like a cruise ship.
Yes, whoever needs me, I'll be there. So yeah, I did decide that I think ultimately it's death because it's so misunderstood, and I find myself, especially after Sharon died, I was really living in that world. Like if you asked me what was happening, my conversations were about death or whatever. So I find myself struggling to get myself back out of that world, but I recognized in this journey with Sharon, because so much of caring for my dad was, I was his daughter, and that was so much of the journey, was showing up for my parent. And but for Sharon, I really got to understand that I was making a difference for not just for her, but for her family and her community. I received cards from people I'd never met before after Sharon died,
Wow.
Saying, I know that you've been through a lot, and I hope that you're well, and we're so grateful that you were there for Sharon and for us. So yeah, I'm serving the force, and And when I started studying, I thought about, we spoke a little bit about the divine feminine, and I decided that if I were to choose a representative of the divine feminine from mythology, that would be Persephone, because she was daughter. I was walking with my father, and but she was also goddess of the underworld. And in the non-patriarchal telling of her story,
Yeah,
because there's always two sides to a story.
Oh yeah.
She is one day in the fields collecting flowers to make a circlet for her mother Demeter's hair, and she comes across souls who are lost, who are seeking their way into the underworld. And when she recognizes that there are souls who needed her guidance, she told her mother, I must go. And she chose to go into the underworld, and she created this ritual of welcome as they transitioned into this new form of existence. And so it is, being a priestess of Persephone to me more than being an end of life doula, because there's a sense of being able to sense what a community needs, and then creating the space for meeting that need. And that's different for everybody. It's different for the family, it's different for the community, and it's different for the person who is departing. And so intuiting what that is, and then showing up and, holding space. Those are the things that feel really important about that. I have really, I think, deepened my sense of gratitude for living because of this experience of walking with those who are dying. It's like that we are learning how to live more fully because we are honoring the part that comes next. We get to live really fully right now in this experience, in this body, and then we have this next phase to look forward to that is not quite as limited as this one. So as an end-of-life doula, I am thinking about that. How can you live more freely in this moment? And once again, to bring my friends Sharon and Ellen into that picture before, just like 6 months maybe before Sharon unexpectedly went into heart failure, I had encouraged she and her wife to do their 5 wishes. And so a group of us got together with their daughter, and we all did our 5 wishes together. That's talking about how you want to be treated at the end of life. Who do you want to care for you and make decisions for you, and how do you want to have people with you, or do you want to be alone in solitude, or do you want to have music playing? Do you want to have someone put lotion on your hands and feet? And so every aspect of that, thinking about the end of life, and then also doing the other paperwork that was going to make it easier for their daughter to care for them, so we did all of that in the nick of time, for her durable power of attorney and that sort of thing. We hadn't imagined we would lose either of them anytime soon. But the idea of having that done, like even, I'm in my mid-50s, I've had my paperwork done for a decade, because the truth is we don't know what our expiration date is. And when you have done everything that you can to care for yourself, and then I consider this to be caring for those who love me, to have this plan in place. because, like I said, with my dad, it was right there. I didn't have to go, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. Am I betraying you by letting you go? I understood I would be betraying him by not letting him go. So what a gift it is. And it let us all live more fully in the moment because we didn't have to worry about what was going to happen next. So it's those things. It's encouraging paperwork, the mundane stuff, but the really important stuff. And then also for me, it's been going to doctor's appointments and asking questions that my elders don't think about or can't remember. You have loved ones who have memory loss or dementia, and so just companioning them through these things that are becoming harder and harder. That's used to seem really simple. Going to the doctor used to seem like a really simple thing, but now it's a struggle to walk to the car and to get into the office and trying not to fall down. And there's so much involved in the aging process. So for me, it's that too, and it is going to the hospital or the rehab and paying attention to the attention that they're getting or not getting as a patient. My lifelong friend, my Kelly, her name is Kim. Her mother died just a few days after my friend Sharon did, and weeks before that, she had asked me to talk to her about her choice to go into rehab and the thought process that her siblings had. Her brother thought maybe if mom goes into rehab, she can get stronger because she's been falling down and we're not really sure why. But with the experience that I'd had with my dad, what I learned was you don't really get stronger in rehab, that you end up, because you're a fall risk, you can't get out of bed. And so they get you out to do physical therapy for 30 minutes, and then you have to stay in bed the rest of the time. So if you have the capacity at home to assist your aging parent, it's actually far better for them just to go home, and then you can be the one who spots them to the bathroom because you can come when they need you. Whereas when you're in a place that's got limited staffing, they can't necessarily rush when you push the button. It might take 30 minutes before they can get to you. So so there's so much of that experience and knowledge that you can share and help someone make a better decision. And then it's that part about communication and starting a Caring Bridge page. We did that probably a year before Sharon and Ellen started this process. Her wife Ellen has vascular dementia, and her memory has gotten shorter and shorter, so that she'll repeat herself. It used to be like if you were with her for 4 hours, you'd hear the same story twice. Now it's like if you're with her for 2 minutes, she's repeating the thing after she's spoken it. So there's paying attention to what someone is experiencing, and then reporting back to the family. I'm seeing this in your mom, and I'm concerned about this, or noticing that they haven't taken all of their pills. If you've lined them up in the pill box and you notice they're not taking them, there's so much about the journey that is possible, because it can be caregiving, but it doesn't have to be. You could be just the communicator. The Caring Bridge page for them was saying, we need someone to come spend time with Ellen while Sharon's in the hospital. Giving an update. This is what we learned from the doctors on their rounds today. Helping people feel connected when they feel so helpless. You want to help someone you love and you don't know what to do. And so letting them know that, showing up is enough, and holding space and being prepared to serve in any way I encouraged people while Sharon was in the hospital to come. They would say, I don't know if I should come because I know she needs her rest. And I would say, it doesn't have to take any energy from her at all for you to come stand next to her bed and hold her hand. And you don't even have to say anything at all if you don't find words. It's the being there that comforts you as well as her. Because, when she's gone, we have to hold on to what our experience was, which is maybe some regret that we didn't go and hold her hand.
Absolutely.
There's it's such a it just feels like a real blessing to be able to remind people that you don't have to be afraid, and it does feel scary, and it's okay to feel afraid, but really it's the love is still there. This person is in transition, but they're not gone. They're even if they can't speak to you, the soul is there and present and understands more than our human brain is capable of. And so if you just show up, it will mean the world, maybe more than you can imagine, because it's something that you'll know that you showed up for them.
For those who have not experienced the last few moments of someone leaving their body, describe that process. And I'm always interested in the little woo-woo things that come out of that. Like, I know I have an aunt who was very sick and in the hospital and close to death. She saw all of her relatives around her bed. She didn't see faces, but she knew they were all there. And then as she got better, they slowly backed off, but one person, a friend of hers, stayed to kind of get her back into her body, I guess, her healthier state. But she remembers that. I would love to know what kind of things you've experienced to that end.
I haven't had the experience where people shared with me what they were seeing, except for, once again, I returned to Sharon, who was such a skeptic. And she told me the day before they decided they were not going to be able to do the procedure for her heart, and they were going to take more time to see what would happen. It was ultimately the day before she went into ICU and her organs shut down. She said, when I woke up, I felt the presence of my mother. And I thought, this is significant because she doesn't believe in this stuff.
Yeah.
And she said, I said, well, did you receive any kind of message from her? And she said, no, I just felt her presence. I felt like she was there. She said, do you think that means I'm going to die? And I said, well, I don't know for sure, but, it could be that she's showing up because she wants you to be well. And she's watching over you. I did in my gut feel like, oh no, and because of course I didn't want that to be the answer either. But yeah, for me, I'm a skeptical believer. I have always felt like, I need you to prove this to me. I need to have this experience myself. And I'll go out and I'll look for those experiences because I want to have them. I am open to receiving these experiences. And I have, knowing that that's where I come from, that complete skeptic that Sharon was, that I used to be that, but that I've had more and more things happen in my life that have changed the way that I see the world. And I thought, yeah, that was real. That Sharon experienced that. This skeptic experienced her mother standing with her in the hospital in the last week of her life. Yeah. So with my dad, he wasn't as expressive. I could tell he was scared, but he didn't really talk about it. He just kind of went quiet and quietly thoughtful. But I guess in the sense of sitting with someone through the end of, to the final heartbeat, I thought about so much the magic of this machine, because the soul is fine. It's like, it's not, it is pristine. And it will leave the body when it's time. I sensed so much with Sharon that there came a point where the soul was separated, but the body was still doing its thing. And that's when I got up. It was 12 hours of sitting with her from when she went under. And it was just like the last 20 minutes, I think, when I realized I was listening to the breath come. And every time there would be a breath, you would think, is this it? And there might be a longer space between breaths. But the body, it's almost like a gasp. The body keeps doing what the body is supposed to do. It's like, nope, this is my job. I take a breath, my heart beats, I take a breath, like, this is what I do. And so at that point, when I just felt, oh my God, this body is not going to let go, because it is so loyal to this sacred soul. And so I went over and I held her hand. I piled our hands on each other, and I petted her hand, and I said, thank you, sacred vessel, for carrying the soul of my friend, for this daughter, this sister, this wife, this stepmother, this counselor, this musician, this friend, this sacred sister, who has been a blessing to us all. Thank you for doing everything that you could to keep her here with us. You have worked hard. You have dealt with so many obstacles, and it's okay to let go. And in that brief conversation of offering gratitude to the vessel, she finally took her last breath. And I gasped when I recognized this is the last breath. I gasped, and the rest of the family stood up. They had been, either resting or sitting quietly, and we all came up around the bedside, and we tried to sing a song. There's a song from the Unitarian Church, Spirit of Life, and we'd kind of, like, over the last 10 days had been, singing it for comfort, and for us and for Sharon. And we started to sing that, and then we couldn't. We were too emotional. We couldn't finish it. So we were just like, okay, all right. And we watched the numbers get smaller and smaller on the oxygen and on the heartbeat until they were at 0. And it was a sense of relief. Finally there's peace. There is, you let go. You did it. You were courageous and have left behind this challenging situation to move into a space where you are now unlimited. So it's not easy. I'll say that for anyone who's not been through it. It's not easy to stay, and because it feels kind of like a struggle, because the body just keeps breathing, keeps doing its thing, and you're just like, I don't want you to go, but I want you to go. I don't want you to go, but I want you to go. And it's so you have this internal struggle as you're bearing witness, because you don't want to be selfish and you don't want to wish them away.
But do you think at that point her soul was above watching all of you?
I do. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not sure for me. I don't know that my intuitive clarity is strong enough to identify when that happens or when that happened for her. But when I sat there listening to the breathing and waiting to see what was going to happen next, I did have a sense, oh, this is just the body doing its thing. The soul is good. The soul has done its work. This is the body that needs to let go now. So yeah, definitely.
Melissa, oh my gosh, it was such a pleasure to have you on here today. If people would like to reach out to you, curious about your services or anything like that, is there a good place for them to go?
Oh, well, I haven't set up anything professionally. So far, I am caring for family and for friends. But I could give you some information to put in your comments. I did publish a book last year that was about my journey with my dad. And,
please share that.
So it's Persephone's Passage. And it's Walking My Father into the Underworld, the Spiritual Journey of an End of Life Doula. It's available on Amazon, and I was so grateful to, when I was doing the studies, I was writing down in the activities, that Deanna Cochran had recommended, as I learned about my experiences with death throughout my life. I kind of realized what I would do differently. When I was young and naive and fearful, I wish I had done this differently. And so that kind of informed what I would want to do in the future if I had the opportunity to walk with someone. And then I was also blogging. My blog is called beethelight.blog, and it's BEE. Melissa means honeybee in Greek. And the Melissa were the priestesses who served the goddesses in ancient Greece. And so it felt like definitely my mom didn't name me Samantha. She named me Melissa. So yeah, the bee thing, being a bee priestess, is a part of my path as well. So I was blogging that whole time, and I have short-term memory stuff as well. I have some childhood trauma stuff that I have a hard time pulling from my memories, or accessing them. And so I was really grateful that I wrote stuff down. I was blogging about what I was learning and how I was walking through nature and experiencing this connectedness that was beyond what we can see, with our eyes. And I was able to pull together the things I was writing about my experiences caring for my father into this book. So for me, it's really a memorial to my father. And
I'm sure very helpful to anybody who would read it who's going through the same thing or has gone through the same thing.
I do hope so. I include the stuff that I learned about elder care and the tools that we use and how Medicare can let you down and not do enough. And so yeah, it's I'm pleased with the gift of words and for the gift of the time that I had with my father and with Sharon, and I do welcome conversations with others, because I think that feels like the most important thing when we've especially come through a period of history when we were so isolated, to connect with each other and talk about the things that are really so important, which is how to love each other more and how to care for each other. whether we're in the fullness of life or at the end of it. That it's a blessing to find connectedness and to feed each other with what we've learned, to know that, oh, well, this is what I learned when I was caring for my mother. This is what I learned when my friend revealed himself to me in my dreams, as you've shared with me. That's the fullness of life, is this sharing and connectedness.
Absolutely, absolutely. I am grateful for you joining us, my dear. Thank you so much for shining your beautiful light here.
Oh, and thank you for welcoming into your sacred space this sacred soul. It's been a pleasure to connect with your sacred soul.
Oh, thank you so much. And we will say goodbye for now to everyone out there. Bye-bye.